Jennifer Moniz had learned 3 things growing up as Eric Moniz's daughter. Never show weakness, never trust easily, and never, ever get your hands dirty. Tonight, she was breaking all 3 rules. The woman's blood was warm against her palms, warmer than she'd expected, sticky and dark as it seeped through the pale fabric of her Valentino dress. Jennifer pressed harder against the wound in the stranger's side, her fingers trembling as she tried to remember everything she'd seen in those medical dramas she'd secretly watched when she was supposed to be studying market analytics. "Stay with me," Jennifer whispered, her voice cracking as the woman's eyelids fluttered. "Please, just stay with me." The alley was wrong for this moment. Too dark, too filthy, too far removed from the glittering charity gala she'd escaped from 20 minutes ago. Her diamond bracelet caught the last rays of golden sunlight filtering between the buildings, creating small prisms of light that danced across the woman's pale face. The contrast was obscene. Jennifer's jewelry cost more than most people made in a year, and here she was, kneeling in garbage and broken glass, watching a stranger die. The woman's lips moved, forming words without sound. "Don't talk," Jennifer said, tears burning her eyes. She didn't know why she was crying. She didn't know this woman, didn't owe her anything. But something in her chest had cracked the moment she'd turned the corner and seen the crumpled figure lying against the dumpster, and now she couldn't look away. "Help is coming. I called 911. They're coming. They'd better be coming." The woman's hand suddenly gripped Jennifer's wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes, pale gray like storm clouds, focused with desperate intensity. This close, Jennifer could see she was beautiful despite the blood matting her dark hair, despite the bruises blooming across her cheekbone. Mid-30s, maybe. Expensive clothes beneath the damage. This wasn't a random mugging. This was something worse. "Run," the woman managed, her voice barely audible. He'll come." "Who?" Jennifer leaned closer, her heart hammering. "Who did this to you?" But the woman's eyes rolled back, her body going slack. No. Jennifer's hands moved frantically, checking for a pulse at her neck. It was there, faint but steady. Still alive. Still fighting. "You don't get to leave me with that. Who's coming? Why should I run?" The sound of footsteps made her freeze. Jennifer's head snapped up, her breath catching as a figure emerged from the shadows at the mouth of the alley. Tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to fill the narrow space. The golden hour light caught him from behind, turning him into nothing more than a dark silhouette, but Jennifer could feel the weight of his stare even if she couldn't see his face. Every instinct her father had drilled into her screamed danger. Her hand moved to her clutch purse, fumbling for her phone, but it slipped from her blood-slicked fingers and clattered across the pavement. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The man moved forward, and Jennifer's body reacted before her mind could catch up. She positioned herself between him and the unconscious woman, her designer heels scraping against concrete as she shifted her weight. Her hands were still pressed against the wound, but her eyes never left the approaching figure. "Stay back," she said, and was proud when her voice didn't shake. "The police are on their way." He stopped just beyond the reach of direct sunlight, his features still obscured. But Jennifer could see enough now. The expensive cut of his suit, the deliberate way he held himself, the glint of something metallic at his hip that made her blood run cold. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was wrong for a villain. It was smooth, controlled, with an accent she couldn't quite place. European maybe, but softened by years somewhere else. The kind of voice that belonged in boardrooms and opera houses, not blood-stained alleys. It reminded her uncomfortably of her father's business associates, the ones who smiled while discussing hostile takeovers and asset liquidation. The ones who made people disappear. "Neither should she," Jennifer shot back, nodding toward the woman. "But here we are." A pause. Then something that might have been amusement in his tone. "Brave or stupid? I haven't decided yet." He took another step forward, and the light finally caught his face. Jennifer's breath stuttered. She'd expected cruelty, a hard face to match the danger rolling off him in waves. Instead, she found herself staring at features that belonged on magazine covers, the kind of masculine beauty that didn't seem real outside of carefully edited photographs. Strong jaw, dark hair pushed back from his forehead, eyes so dark they looked black in the shadows. But it was the exhaustion in those eyes that struck her, the bone-deep weariness that no amount of expensive tailoring could hide. This was a man who carried bodies in his wake. And yet, is she alive? He asked, and there was something raw in the question that made Jennifer's chest tighten. Barely. Jennifer glanced down at the woman, checking her pulse again. Still there. Still fighting. She needs a hospital. She needs. No hospitals. Jennifer's head snapped back up. Excuse me? No hospitals, he repeated, closing the distance between them with 3 long strides. No police. No, he stopped, his gaze finally dropping to the woman, and something shattered across his expression. For a moment he looked utterly destroyed. Then his face smoothed into something blank and cold, and Jennifer realized she'd just witnessed something she wasn't supposed to see. Something vulnerable. Something human. Who is she? Jennifer demanded. Who is she to you? He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out his phone, sleek, expensive, probably more secure than most government devices, and made a call. His eyes never left the woman's face. It's me, he said into the phone. I need a medical team. Private. Immediately. A pause. No, not the usual location. I'll send coordinates. Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something dangerous. And find out who talked. He ended the call and finally looked at Jennifer again. Really looked at her, his gaze sweeping from her tear-stained face to her blood-soaked hands to the diamond bracelet still glinting on her wrist. She watched him calculate, assess, and ultimately come to a conclusion she knew she wouldn't like. You need to leave, he said quietly. Right now. Forget you saw this. I can't just. You can. He crouched down beside the woman, his movements careful despite his size. His hand hovered over her face but didn't quite touch, as if he was afraid she might shatter. You will. Because if you stay, if anyone knows you were here, you become a liability. And I don't keep liabilities alive. The threat should have terrified her. Jennifer could hear her father's voice in her head, telling her to run, to call security, to remove herself from this disaster before it touched the Moniz name. Instead, she pressed harder against the wound, feeling warm blood pulse against her palm. She told me to run, Jennifer said softly. Her last words before she passed out were a warning. She was trying to protect me. She looked up, meeting his dark eyes without flinching. So I'm not leaving her. If you want me gone, you'll have to move me yourself. For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Jennifer could see him weighing options, calculating risks, deciding whether she was worth the trouble of keeping alive, or if she'd already sealed her fate the moment she'd stumbled into this alley. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Eric Moniz's daughter, he said, and it wasn't a question. I've seen your picture. Charity galas. Business magazines. Always perfect, always controlled. His gaze dropped to her ruined dress, her blood-stained hands, the fierce set of her jaw. You're nothing like your photographs. Jennifer's heart stopped. He knew her father, which meant her father probably knew him. Which meant, who are you? She whispered. Before he could answer, the woman gasped, a wet, horrible sound that turned into a cough. Blood flecked her lips. Her eyes opened, unfocused and desperate, searching for something. Damien, she breathed, and her hand reached out blindly. The man, Damien, caught her hand in his, pressing it against his chest. I'm here, Susie. I'm here. Susie. The dying woman had a name. I'm sorry, Susie whispered, and then she said something in what sounded like Russian, fast, urgent, meant only for him. Jennifer watched Damien's face go white. Whatever Susie had just told him, it had changed everything. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Damien's head jerked up, his expression hardening. They can't find me here, he said, already standing. He looked at Jennifer, and for the first time, she saw real fear in his eyes. Not for himself. For Susie. Take care of her. Make sure his jaw clenched. Don't let her die alone. Wait! But he was already moving, melting back into the shadows as if he'd never been there at all. Jennifer scrambled to her feet, her legs numb from kneeling, but he was gone, disappeared like smoke, leaving her alone with a dying woman and questions that felt like poison on her tongue. The sirens were screaming now, so close she could see the flash of red and blue lights painting the alley entrance. Jennifer looked down at Susie's pale face, at the blood still seeping between her fingers, and made a choice that would destroy everything she'd built. She pressed harder against the wound and waited for help to arrive. But as the paramedics rushed toward her, as questions exploded around her like shrapnel, Jennifer couldn't stop thinking about the way Damien had looked at Susie, like she was his entire world bleeding out on dirty concrete. And she couldn't stop wondering what Susie had whispered that made a dangerous man afraid. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and secrets. Jennifer Moniz sat in the waiting room with blood still dried beneath her fingernails, her designer dress ruined beyond repair. She'd refused to leave. The nurses had offered her scrubs to change into, a place to wash up, but she'd shaken her head. Not until she knew the woman would survive. Susie. That's what the paramedics had found in the woman's wallet. Susie Chandler. No emergency contacts. No one to call. Just a library card and a few crumpled receipts from a diner on the east side. Jennifer had given her statement to the police, twice. She'd answered their questions with the calm precision her father had drilled into her since childhood. Yes, she'd found the woman on Archer Street. No, she didn't see anyone else. Yes, she was certain she wanted to stay. What she hadn't told them was the way her hands had trembled when she'd pressed them against Susie's wounds, or how something in the woman's face had looked almost familiar. Like a photograph she'd seen once and forgotten. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Jennifer checked her phone. 17 missed calls from her father. 5 from her brother. A dozen texts she didn't have the energy to read. She turned the phone face down on her lap. Miss Moniz. Jennifer looked up. A doctor stood in front of her, clipboard in hand, exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes. She rose to her feet. Is she? Stable, the doctor said. Critical but stable. The next 24 hours will tell us more. You saved her life. If you'd been even 5 minutes later. He trailed off, the implication clear. Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her knees weak. Can I see her? The doctor hesitated. She's unconscious. And there's someone else here. He arrived about 20 minutes ago. Says he knows her. Jennifer frowned. I thought she didn't have any emergency contacts. She doesn't. But he was insistent. Something in the doctor's tone made Jennifer's pulse quicken. What do you mean, insistent? The doctor glanced down the hallway, then back at her. Let's just say he's not the kind of man you say no to. The hallway leading to the ICU was long and cold, all white marble and sterile lighting. Jennifer's heels clicked against the floor with each step, the sound echoing in the emptiness. She saw him before he saw her. He stood in front of the observation window, perfectly still, staring through the glass at Susie's room. Even from behind, he commanded attention, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a 3-piece suit so black it seemed to absorb the light around him. His hands were in his pockets, but there was nothing casual about his posture. He stood like a man carved from stone, like he was holding the weight of the world through sheer force of will. Jennifer slowed her approach, some instinct warning her that she was about to cross a threshold she couldn't uncross. Then he turned. The air left her lungs. He was beautiful in the way dangerous things were beautiful. Sharp edges and dark eyes, and a face that belonged on old paintings of fallen angels. Mid-30s, maybe. Dark hair swept back from his forehead, a jaw that could cut glass, and eyes that were currently locked on her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. But it was the expression on his face that stopped her cold. Devastation. Pure, unfiltered devastation barely contained beneath an iron mask of control. His hand covered his mouth, and she could see the tremor in his fingers. His other hand gripped the door frame so hard his knuckles had gone white. His eyes, his eyes, were wide and glassy like he was staring at a ghost. You, he said, his voice rough and low. You're the one who found her. It wasn't a question. Jennifer nodded slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Yes. On Archer Street. She was Dying. The word came out like a bullet. He dropped his hand from his mouth, and she caught a glimpse of something metallic beneath his jacket. A gun. He was carrying a gun. She should have been afraid. She should have run. Instead, she took a step closer. "Who are you?" she asked. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. The sound was bitter and broken. Someone who spent 5 years believing she was dead. Jennifer's blood ran cold. "What?" He turned back to the window, staring at Susie's unconscious form. "Susie Chandler. Is that what her ID said?" "Yes." "That's not her name." His jaw tightened. "Her name is Elena Russo. And she's my wife." The world tilted. Jennifer grabbed the wall for support, her mind racing. Wife. He'd said wife. But Susie, Elena, had no wedding ring, no photos, nothing to suggest she had anyone in her life at all. "That's impossible," Jennifer whispered. "She had nothing. No contacts, no. Because she's been in hiding." He turned back to her, and the full force of his gaze hit her like a physical blow. Witness protection. The marshals faked her death 5 years ago after someone tried to kill her. I watched her coffin get lowered into the ground. I mourned her. His voice cracked on the last word, and Jennifer saw him fight to pull himself back together. It was like watching armor slot back into place, piece by piece. "If she's been in witness protection," Jennifer said carefully, "then how did she end up bleeding out on Archer Street?" "That," he said darkly, "is exactly what I'm going to find out." He pushed off the wall and walked toward her. Jennifer held her ground, even as every survival instinct screamed at her to back away. He stopped just in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something expensive and woody and dangerous. "You're Eric Moniz's daughter," he said. Not a question. A statement of fact. Jennifer's breath caught. "How do you?" "I make it my business to know things." His eyes swept over her, cataloging every detail. The blood on her dress, the exhaustion in her face, the defiance in her eyes that she couldn't quite hide. "You're the one who never appears in the tabloids. The invisible daughter. I didn't even know Eric had a daughter until tonight." "Who are you?" Jennifer demanded, though part of her was afraid of the answer. He smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing she'd ever seen. "Damien Russo," he said. "And your father is the reason my wife was almost killed the first time." The accusation hung in the air between them like a knife. Jennifer shook her head. "No, that's not. My father wouldn't." "Your father," Damien interrupted softly, "has built his empire on blood and backroom deals. 5 years ago, Elena found evidence of some of those deals. Deals between Eric Moniz and my business rivals. Deals that would have destroyed both our companies if they came to light." "You're lying." "Am I?" He tilted his head, studying her. "Tell me, Jennifer, how much do you really know about what your father does?" She wanted to argue. Wanted to defend the man who'd raised her, who'd taught her to be strong and smart and ruthless when necessary. But doubt crept in, cold and insidious. Because she didn't know. She'd spent her whole life on the periphery of her father's world, protected and kept separate from the uglier parts of his business. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Damien's expression shifted, something dark and possessive flickering in his eyes. "You saved her life. That means you're involved now, whether you want to be or not. Someone tried to kill Elena again. They'll want to finish the job. And they'll want to eliminate any witnesses." "You mean me?" "I mean you." He stepped closer, invading her space, and Jennifer's pulse skyrocketed. "Which means, Jennifer Moniz, that you belong to me now. Until I figure out who tried to kill my wife and why she came out of hiding, you're going to stay exactly where I can see you. You can't just." "I can. I will." His voice dropped to a whisper. "And if you're smart, you won't fight me on this. The people who did this don't leave loose ends. You're a loose end." Jennifer lifted her chin, meeting his gaze even though her heart was trying to beat out of her chest. "And what if I refuse?" Damien leaned in, so close she could feel his breath against her ear. "Then I'll have to make you understand," he murmured, "exactly how dangerous your world just became." He pulled back, and the look in his eyes made her forget every rational thought. "Go home, Jennifer. Pack a bag. My driver will pick you up in 2 hours." "What if I run?" The corner of his mouth lifted in something that wasn't quite a smile. "I really hope you try." Then he turned and walked back to the observation window, dismissing her like she was nothing. But Jennifer couldn't move, couldn't breathe, because she'd seen something in his eyes in that final moment. Something that terrified her more than his threats or his gun or the darkness that surrounded him like a second skin. Recognition, not of her face, but of something deeper. Something she felt too. And as she finally forced herself to walk away, her phone buzzed in her hand. A text from an unknown number. 2 hours. Don't make me come find you. D. Jennifer deleted the message with shaking hands. But she knew, God help her, she knew, she'd be ready when his driver arrived. The penthouse was a temple of excess. Jennifer stood with her back pressed against the floor-to-ceiling window, the glittering Manhattan skyline sprawling behind her like a kingdom she didn't belong to. 43 floors below, the city hummed with life, oblivious ordinary life. Up here the air felt thinner. Dangerous. She was still wearing the clothes from the hospital. Her cream silk blouse, now wrinkled and stained with Susie's blood. Her tailored pants, smudged with dirt from the pavement where she'd knelt, begging the woman not to die. She'd tried to wash her hands in the hospital bathroom, scrubbing until her skin burned, but traces of rust-colored stains still clung to her cuticles. She could still feel the weight of Susie's head in her lap, the way her breath had rattled, thin and desperate. And she could still feel his eyes on her. Eric Moniz stood across the room, a predator in a three-piece suit. He hadn't spoken since his driver brought her here. No, took her here. There had been no request. No polite invitation. Just a low, gravelly command whispered in the sterile hospital corridor. "You're coming with me." And she had. God help her, she had. Jennifer crossed her arms over her chest, trying to create some barrier between herself and the man who seemed to consume all the oxygen in the room. Her father had warned her about men like Eric Moniz. Men who built empires on secrets and blood. Men who didn't ask for what they wanted, they took it. But her father, for all his warnings, had never mentioned how magnetic danger could feel. Eric moved toward the bar cart, his movements controlled, deliberate. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal tumbler, the sound of whiskey hitting glass obscenely loud in the silence. He didn't offer her one. He lifted the glass to his lips, his dark eyes never leaving hers. "You saved her life," he said finally, his voice like gravel wrapped in silk. Jennifer's throat tightened. "I did what anyone would." "No." The word was a blade. He took a slow step toward her. "Most people would have walked past. Called 911, maybe. But you knelt in the street, ruined your expensive clothes, and held a dying stranger while she bled out in your arms." Another step. Jennifer's pulse hammered. She needed help. She needed a miracle. His gaze dragged down her body, clinical and invasive, lingering on the bloodstains. "And you gave her one." Her hands clenched into fists. "Who is she to you?" Eric's jaw tightened, a muscle ticking near his temple. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he drained the rest of his whiskey in one swallow and set the glass down with a sharp clink. "My wife." The word punched the air from Jennifer's lungs. Wife. Susie Chandler was his wife. Jennifer's mind raced, trying to process the impossibility of it. The woman had been alone, bleeding on a side street in the Bronx, dressed in clothes that had seen better days. No security. No entourage. Nothing that screamed billionaire's wife. "I don't understand," Jennifer breathed. "If she's your wife, why was she?" "That," Eric interrupted, his voice dropping to something lethal, "is none of your concern." He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, and suddenly he was there. So close she could smell the whiskey on his breath, the faint trace of expensive cologne, and something darker underneath. Smoke. Gunpowder, maybe. He braced one hand against the glass beside her head, caging her in without touching her. His other hand still held the empty tumbler, dangling loosely from his fingers as though he might drop it. Or throw it. Jennifer's breath hitched. She should have been afraid. She was afraid. But beneath the fear was something else, something that coiled hot and dangerous in her stomach. "You should have left her there," Eric said softly, his gaze tracing the curve of her jaw, the flutter of her pulse at her throat. You should have walked away. I couldn't. The words came out steadier than she felt. Why not? Because. Jennifer swallowed, her voice dropping to a whisper. Because no one deserves to die alone. Something flickered in his eyes, grief, maybe, or fury. It was gone before she could name it. Noble, he murmured, leaning in just enough that she felt the heat of him. And incredibly stupid. Her chin lifted in defiance. Then I'm stupid. His lips curved, but there was no humor in it. You have no idea what you've walked into, Jennifer Moniz. Hearing her full name on his tongue sent a shiver down her spine. Of course he knew who she was. Men like Eric Moniz made it their business to know everything. My father. Your father, Eric interrupted, his voice turning to ice, is the reason my wife was bleeding out on that street. Jennifer's heart stopped. What? Eric pulled back slightly, just enough to let her breathe, but his gaze pinned her in place. 5 years ago, your father and I had a business disagreement. Susie got caught in the crossfire. I was told she died. For 5 years, I believed she was dead. His voice cracked on the last word, and Jennifer saw it then, the fracture in his armor. The raw, bleeding wound that no amount of money or power could heal. I mourned her, he continued, his tone hollow now. I burned half this city looking for the people responsible. And now she's back, alive, with no memory of who put a bullet in her, or why she's been hiding. Jennifer's mind reeled. Her father. Her father was involved in this. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear I didn't. I know. Eric's hand moved, and for one heart-stopping moment, she thought he might touch her face. Instead, he curled his fingers into a fist and dropped his arm. If you had, you wouldn't have saved her. He stepped back, putting distance between them, and Jennifer felt the loss of his heat like a physical ache. But now you're here, Eric said, turning away from her to stare out at the city. And I can't let you leave. Panic flared in her chest. You can't keep me here. He glanced over his shoulder, and the look in his eyes made her blood run cold. I can. And I will. This is kidnapping. This, Eric corrected, is protection. Whoever tried to kill Susie 5 years ago knows she's alive now. And they know you're the one who saved her. You're a witness. A liability. Then let me go to the police. Eric laughed, sharp and bitter. The police can't protect you from the people I'm dealing with. Trust me. I don't trust you. Good. He turned back to her fully, his expression unreadable. You shouldn't. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Jennifer's mind raced, searching for an escape, a loophole, anything. But every path led back to the same conclusion. She was trapped. How long? She asked quietly. Until I find out who wants her dead. And why? He paused, his gaze softening just a fraction. You saved her life, Jennifer. Now I'm going to save yours. Whether you like it or not. I don't need saving. Eric moved toward her again, and this time when he stopped, he was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Everyone needs saving, he murmured. Some of us are just better at pretending we don't. His hand rose, and this time he did touch her. A fleeting brush of his knuckles against her cheek, so gentle it felt like a hallucination. You'll stay here. In this penthouse. My men will watch the entrances. You won't leave without my permission. And if I refuse? His thumb traced the line of her jaw, and his voice dropped to a dangerous purr. Then I'll make sure you can't. Jennifer's breath caught. She should slap his hand away. She should scream. But instead she stood frozen, caught in the gravity of him. I owe you a debt, Eric said softly, his gaze dropping to her lips. For saving Susie. But gratitude is a dangerous thing, Jennifer. It means you belong to me now. Until that debt is paid. I don't belong to anyone. His smile was slow, predatory. We'll see. He stepped back, breaking the spell, and Jennifer sucked in a shaky breath. Your room is down the hall, Eric said, his tone businesslike now, as though he hadn't just threatened and seduced her in the same breath. Second door on the left. There are clothes in the closet. Help yourself. He started toward the door, then paused, glancing back at her one last time. Get some rest, Jennifer. Tomorrow your old life ends. And then he was gone, leaving her alone in the glass tower with nothing but the city lights and the terrifying certainty that he was right. She wasn't walking out of here. Not until he let her. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and broken promises. Jennifer stood outside the private room, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth of Eric's suit jacket draped over her shoulders. She hadn't asked for it. He'd simply placed it there 3 hours ago when her shivering became too obvious to ignore, his fingers brushing against her collarbone in a way that made her breath catch. She hadn't been able to stop thinking about that touch since. Stop it, she told herself firmly. Stop thinking about him like that. But it was impossible. Everything about the past 72 hours had been impossible. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting harsh shadows across the sterile corridor. Through the glass partition, Jennifer could see Susie Chandler, the woman she'd saved, the woman who'd been bleeding out on that dark street corner, lying motionless in the hospital bed. Bandages wrapped around her head like a crown of trauma. For lines snaked from her arms. Monitors beeped steadily, the only proof she was still alive. She looked so fragile, so beautiful even now. Dark hair spread across the pillow, delicate features pale against the white sheets. And she was Eric Moniz's wife. The wife everyone thought had died 5 years ago. Jennifer's chest tightened with a guilt so profound it felt physical. She pressed her palm against the glass, her reflection staring back at her. Haunted eyes, tangled hair, still wearing the designer dress that had cost more than most people's monthly rent, now ruined with bloodstains she couldn't wash away. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Measured. Controlled. She didn't need to turn around to know it was him. Eric stopped beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He didn't touch her. He didn't speak. He just stood there, staring at the woman in the bed with an expression Jennifer couldn't decipher. Was it love? Grief? Rage? Maybe all three. The doctor said she's stable, Eric finally said, his voice low and rough like gravel wrapped in silk. But the memory loss, they don't know if it's permanent. Jennifer swallowed hard. What does she remember? Nothing. The single word came out like a death sentence. She doesn't remember me. Doesn't remember the attack. Doesn't remember the 5 years she spent in hiding, or why she was running. Doesn't remember you saved her life, Jennifer thought, though she didn't say it aloud. Eric's jaw clenched, the muscle ticking beneath his perfectly groomed stubble. His hand came up slowly, fingers splaying against the glass beside hers. So close their pinkies almost touched. Almost, but not quite. The space between them felt like an electric current. They're going to try cognitive therapy, he continued, his gaze never leaving Susie's sleeping form. See if they can unlock what's buried in there. But it could take months. Years. Or never, Jennifer finished quietly. He turned his head then, looking at her for the first time since they'd arrived at the hospital. His dark eyes were bloodshot, exhausted, but still sharp enough to cut through every defense she'd tried to build. You should go home, Jennifer. Her name on his lips sent an inappropriate shiver down her spine. She hated herself for it. I can't, she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Not yet. Why? His brow furrowed slightly. You've done enough. More than enough. You saved her life. You don't owe me. This isn't about owing you anything. Jennifer turned to face him fully, her heart hammering against her ribs. Someone tried to kill her, Mr. Moniz. And I'm the only witness who saw anything that night. Which means you're a target now. His voice dropped to something dangerous, almost possessive. I know. Why do you think I've kept you here? The confession hung in the air between them like smoke. Jennifer's breath caught. You've been keeping me here? I thought. You thought what? That I was letting you stay out of the goodness of my heart. A bitter smile curved his lips, one that didn't reach his eyes. I'm not a good man, Jennifer. The sooner you understand that, the safer you'll be. But the way he was looking at her now, like she was something precious and dangerous all at once, made her feel anything but safe. His hand moved from the glass to her lower back, so subtle she almost didn't register it at first. Just his palm, resting against the curve of her spine through the thin fabric of her dress and his jacket. The touch was barely there, could have been protective or controlling or both. Jennifer's pulse spiked. "Mr. Moniz." "Eric." His thumb moved in a small circle against her back, sending heat spiraling through her body. "If we're going to do this, you'll call me Eric." "Do what?" Her voice came out breathier than she intended. His gaze dropped to her lips, just for a second, before dragging back up to meet her eyes. "Keep you alive." The words should have terrified her. Instead, they ignited something dark and reckless in her chest. Before she could respond, the door to Susie's room opened. A nurse stepped out, clipboard in hand, her expression carefully neutral. "She's awake," the nurse said quietly. "But she's very disoriented. The doctor thinks it's best if only immediate family visits for now." Eric's hand fell away from Jennifer's back, leaving her feeling suddenly cold. He straightened, his entire demeanor shifting into something harder, more controlled. The man who'd been touching her moments ago disappeared behind the mask of the ruthless CEO. "I'll go in," he said. The nurse nodded and stepped aside. But before Eric moved, Jennifer caught his arm. "Wait!" He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then up at her face. "Waiting? What if?" Jennifer's throat tightened. "What if she remembers everything? What if she remembers you and what you had together, and then I deal with it?" His voice was flat, emotionless. But his eyes told a different story. "That's what I've been doing for 5 years, Jennifer. Dealing with losing her. If she comes back to me, I'll be grateful. If she doesn't..." He trailed off, his gaze drifting back to the woman in the bed. "If she doesn't," Jennifer whispered, finishing the thought he couldn't. "Then who are you?" Eric's expression shuddered completely. Without another word, he pulled away from her grip and walked toward the door. Jennifer watched through the glass as he entered the room. Watched as Susie's eyes opened, confused and frightened. Watched as Eric sat in the chair beside her bed, his movements careful, controlled, like he was approaching a wounded animal. He said something. Susie blinked at him, her brow furrowing. And then she shook her head. Jennifer's heart cracked at the devastation that flickered across Eric's face. There for only a second before he buried it again. Susie didn't know him. The woman he'd mourned, the woman he'd loved, the woman whose death had carved him hollow. She was looking at him like he was a stranger. Jennifer pressed her forehead against the glass, guilt and something far more dangerous twisting inside her. "You can't want him," she told herself fiercely. "He belongs to her. Even if she doesn't remember, even if she never remembers, he's not yours to want." But when Eric looked up suddenly, his gaze finding hers through the glass partition, the raw anguish in his eyes made her forget every rational thought. Their reflections merged in the glass. Jennifer's face superimposed over Susie's sleeping form, Eric trapped between them both. A triangle of impossible choices. A tragedy already in motion. And in that moment, Jennifer understood with devastating clarity. No matter what happened next, someone was going to get hurt. The only question was who would break first. Jennifer's phone buzzed in her clutch. She pulled it out with trembling fingers. "Unknown number. You should have let her die. Now you're both marked." The blood drained from her face. Through the glass, Eric stood abruptly, his attention snapping to her like he could sense the shift in the air. His eyes narrowed. He knew. Somehow, he knew something was wrong. And as hospital security suddenly appeared at both ends of the corridor, their hands hovering near concealed weapons, Jennifer realized the nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. The rain had started during dessert. Jennifer Moniz stood at the edge of the Russo estate's stone terrace, watching sheets of water cascade from the Gothic mansion's eaves like a curtain separating her from the rest of the world. Behind her, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see them all. Her father Eric's rigid posture as he sat across from Damien Russo, both men's faces carved from the same stone as the mansion itself. Lawyers flanked them like sentries. Her father's new wife, Catherine, picked at her phone with manicured nails, bored by the masculine posturing. And somewhere upstairs, Susie Chandler lay sleeping. The woman Jennifer had saved. The woman who remembered nothing. The woman who had become the axis around which all their lives now rotated. Jennifer's emerald gown clung to her like a second skin, designer fabric that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. She'd worn it as armor tonight. Her father had insisted she attend this reconciliation dinner. As if breaking bread could erase the fact that Eric Moniz had ordered a hit on Susie Chandler 5 years ago. The revelation had come 3 days ago, delivered in Damien's penthouse office with all the ceremony of a death sentence. Jennifer had found the documents herself, buried in her father's private safe, a safe she'd only accessed because someone had tried to kill her outside a charity gala. The assassin's bullet had missed her temple by inches, embedding itself in her driver's headrest instead. Damien's men had eliminated the threat within seconds, but the message was clear. Someone wanted her dead. She'd thought it was Damien, thought he'd decided the daughter of his enemy was a liability. But the truth was so much worse. Her own father had orchestrated Susie's attempted murder, had paid for it, had signed off on it like it was just another business transaction. Because Susie had stumbled onto evidence of Eric's money laundering operation, funds he'd been siphoning from their joint ventures with the Russo family. Susie hadn't been Damien's wife back then. She'd been an accountant, a brilliant, honest woman who'd made the mistake of looking too closely at numbers that didn't add up. Eric Moniz had tried to kill her to protect his empire. And Jennifer had saved her. The irony tasted like ash on her tongue. You'll catch pneumonia out here. Jennifer didn't turn. She'd known he would follow her. Had felt his gaze burning into her back all through dinner, even as he'd negotiated with her father like she didn't exist. Like the past 3 weeks, the forced proximity, the charged silences, the way his hand lingered too long on her lower back, had been nothing but a fever dream. Better than suffocating in there, she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Watching you and my father pretend you won't kill each other the moment the contracts are signed. Damien moved beside her, close enough that she could feel his body heat despite the cold rain misting around them. He'd removed his suit jacket, and his white shirt was already dampening, becoming translucent across his shoulders. He didn't seem to notice or care. Your father wants peace, Damien said, and his voice carried that same dangerous calm it always did, like a blade hidden in silk. He's offering to restructure our partnership. Give me controlling interest in his shipping operations. Substantial reparations. Blood money. Jennifer finally turned to face him, and the movement brought them closer than she'd intended. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the tension in his jaw. He's buying your forgiveness for trying to murder your wife. She's not my wife anymore. The words landed between them like a grenade. Jennifer's breath caught. Susie is. Alive because of you. Breathing because you refused to look away. Damien's hand rose, and for a moment Jennifer thought he might touch her face. Instead, his fingers curled into a fist and dropped. But she's not the woman I married. That woman died 5 years ago, even if her heart kept beating. She could still remember. She won't. The certainty in his voice was brutal. The doctors confirmed it yesterday. The trauma damaged too much. She'll recover physically, but the memories are gone. Everything we were gone. Rain began to fall harder, fat drops that quickly soaked through Jennifer's gown. She should go inside. Should walk away from this man who looked at her like she was both salvation and damnation. Should remember that she was Eric Moniz's daughter, and he was Damien Russo, and between them lay a body count she didn't want to calculate. But her feet remained rooted to the stone terrace. So what happens now? She asked, and hated how small her voice sounded. My father pays you off, you let him live, and we all pretend this never happened? Is that what you want? Damien moved closer, and this time there was no pretense of propriety. His hands came up on either side of her head, palms flat against the stone wall at her back, caging her in. Not touching, but close enough that she could count his heartbeats. To pretend. Jennifer's hands fisted in the soaked fabric of her gown. She should push him away. Should slap him for his presumption, for the way he'd kept her prisoner in his world for 3 weeks under the guise of protection. Should remind him that his wife was sleeping upstairs, even if she didn't remember him. Instead, she found herself leaning back against the wall, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. I want to understand why you look at me the way you do, she whispered. The rain plastered her hair to her skull, sent mascara tracking down her cheeks in dark rivulets. She must look like a drowned wraith. Like you hate me and want me in the same breath. Damien's forehead dropped forward until it pressed against hers. His eyes closed, and she watched his throat work as he swallowed hard. When he spoke, his voice was raw, stripped of all the control he usually wielded like a weapon. Because you're impossible. Because you saved the woman I loved, and in doing so, you destroyed any chance I had of hating you for being his daughter. His breath ghosted across her lips, warm against the cold rain. Because every time I look at you, I see the compassion I thought had been beaten out of this world. And it terrifies me how much I want to corrupt it. Corrupt you. Jennifer's hands moved of their own accord, reaching up to grip the front of his soaked shirt. She should push him away. God, she should run. But instead she pulled him closer, until the solid heat of him pressed against her, until she could feel the thunder of his heart matching her own. Maybe I'm not as innocent as you think, she breathed. Maybe I'm already corrupted. Maybe that's why I can't stop thinking about you, even though everything about this is wrong. It's not wrong. Damien's hands finally moved from the wall, one sliding into her wet hair, cradling her skull with surprising gentleness. The other curved around her waist, possessive and claiming. It's the only thing that's felt right since I pulled that trigger 5 years ago. Jennifer's mind stuttered. What? The man who shot Susie. I killed him myself. Put a bullet between his eyes and thought I had my revenge. His thumb traced her cheekbone, wiping away a mixture of rain and tears she hadn't realized she was crying. But he was just a hired gun. The real enemy was always closer. I just didn't know how close. The weight of his confession settled over her like lead. You'll kill my father. I should. His eyes opened, and the agony in them stole her breath. Every rule I've ever lived by says I should end him for what he did. But if I do that, I lose you. And I've already lost too much. You don't have me. But even as Jennifer said it, she knew it was a lie. Had known it since that first night when he'd stood in the hospital corridor looking shattered, when she'd seen past the ruthless crime lord to the man who'd loved and lost everything. Don't I? His grip tightened in her hair, tilting her head back further. Then why are you trembling? Why have you stayed when I gave you a dozen chances to leave? Why do you look at me like I'm not the monster who's kept you captive? Because you're not keeping me captive. The truth burst from her lips, desperate and damning. I'm staying because I choose to. Because somehow in the middle of this nightmare, I started to see you. The real you. And I can't unsee it. The rain pounded down around them now, a torrential downpour that turned the terrace into a private world of water and darkness. Through the windows, Jennifer could see the dinner party continuing oblivious. Her father checking his watch, Catherine ordering another martini, the lawyers shuffling papers. None of them knew that out here in the rain, everything was changing. Damien's hand slid from her hair down to cup her jaw, his thumb brushing across her lower lip with devastating slowness. If I kiss you right now, there's no going back. You understand that? No more pretending this is just proximity and circumstance. No more blaming it on trauma or Stockholm Syndrome or whatever rationalization you've been using to sleep at night. Jennifer's heart hammered so hard she thought her ribs might crack. She should say no. Should remember Susie upstairs, should remember the blood on her father's hands, should remember that she'd been raised to marry within her class, to play it safe, to never want anything as dangerous as this man. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was, "Then stop talking and kiss me." Damien moved like a man who'd been holding back a flood. His mouth crashed against hers with none of the gentleness she might have expected from his earlier tenderness. This was hunger, raw and desperate, the kind of kiss that felt like drowning and breathing for the first time simultaneously. Jennifer's hands released his shirt only to slide up his chest, his neck, tangling in his wet hair as she pulled him closer, deeper. She kissed him back with equal fervor, months of tension and denial exploding into this single moment. His taste, his touch, the way he groaned low in his throat when her teeth caught his bottom lip. It was oxygen to someone who'd been suffocating. The rain fell harder, and neither of them cared. Damien's hands were everywhere, her waist, her back, sliding up her spine to tangle in her soaked hair, holding her exactly where he wanted her. The kiss turned desperate, almost violent in its intensity. Jennifer felt the stone wall rough against her shoulder blades, felt him press against her until there was no space left between them, until she couldn't tell where her heartbeat ended and his began. When they finally broke apart, both gasping, Damien kept his forehead pressed to hers. His breathing was ragged, control shattered. "I'm damned for this," he whispered against her lips. "For wanting you while she's upstairs. For choosing this over revenge. For not caring that you're his daughter. Then we're both damned." Jennifer opened her eyes, meeting his gaze through the rain. "Because I'd do it again. Right now. Even knowing it's wrong." Damien's laugh was dark, broken. "You're going to destroy me, Jennifer Moniz." "Good," she breathed, pulling him back down for another kiss. "Because you've already destroyed me." The terrace door slammed open. They sprang apart, but not fast enough. Eric Moniz stood in the doorway, rain immediately soaking his expensive suit. Behind him, Catherine peered out with wide, scandalized eyes. But it was her father's expression that made Jennifer's blood freeze. Not anger. Not shock. Calculation. "Well," Eric said slowly, his businessman's mind already spinning this new development into whatever shape suited his purposes. "This changes things considerably." Damien stepped in front of Jennifer, blocking her from her father's view. The possessive gesture was unconscious, instinctive. And from the slight smile that curved Eric's lips, not lost on him. "Get back inside, Moniz. That's my daughter you're pawing in the rain, Russo." But Eric's tone held no paternal outrage. Just that same cold assessment he used when evaluating a business deal. "I think we need to renegotiate our terms." Jennifer's stomach dropped. "Father, don't." "Quiet, Jennifer." Eric's eyes never left Damien. "You want to keep her out of danger? Want to ensure she's not a target for every enemy I've made? Marry her." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What?" Jennifer pushed past Damien, rage temporarily overriding shock. "You can't be serious." "I'm always serious about business." Eric smiled, and it was the smile of a shark scenting blood. "An alliance between our families would end this war before it begins. You want forgiveness for what I did to Susie Chandler? Fine. I give you my daughter instead. My heir. Everything I've built becomes yours when I die. I'm not a bargaining chip." Jennifer's voice cracked. "You became one the moment you saved that woman." Eric's expression didn't change. "You think Russo's enemies don't know who you are now? Don't know you're his weakness? You're a target, Jennifer. Unless you become untouchable." Damien's hand found Jennifer's in the darkness, his fingers lacing through hers with surprising gentleness given the violence radiating from his frame. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I don't need your permission to keep her safe." "No," Eric agreed. "But you need my resources. My connections. My legitimacy in circles you'll never access on your own, no matter how much blood money you've cleaned." He paused, letting that sink in. "Marry her, and I give you everything. Refuse, and I'll make sure she returns home tonight, where I cannot guarantee her safety." The threat was crystal clear. Jennifer's hand tightened on Damien's. She felt him trembling, whether from rage or something else she couldn't tell. "You're threatening your own daughter." "I'm protecting my legacy." Eric's gaze finally moved to Jennifer, and for just a moment, something almost like regret flickered across his face. "You wanted to know why I did it? Why I ordered the hit on Susie Chandler? Because in this world, sentiment is a weakness that gets you killed. I learned that lesson at great cost. Better you learn it now from me than later from someone less merciful." "There's nothing merciful about this," Jennifer spat. "Isn't there?" Eric gestured between her and Damien. "I'm giving you what you clearly want. Him. His protection. A life where you'll never have to bow to anyone. You think I'm blind? I've watched you these past weeks. You're not a prisoner, Jennifer. You're a woman who's finally found something worth fighting for." He turned back to Damien. "You have 24 hours to decide. Marry her and we have peace. Refuse, and take your chances with what comes next." Eric disappeared back into the warmth of the mansion, Catherine scurrying after him. The door clicked shut with the finality of a coffin lid. For a long moment, Jennifer and Damien stood frozen in the rain, hands still clasped, the taste of their kiss still burning on her lips. Finally, Damien turned to face her. Water streamed down his face, plastering his dark hair to his skull. In the dim light from the mansion, he looked like a fallen angel, beautiful and damned. I won't let him force you into this. He's not forcing me. Jennifer stepped closer, free hand coming up to rest against Damien's chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palm. That's what terrifies me. 3 weeks ago, this would have been a prison sentence. Now. His voice was rough. Now I'm trying to figure out why the idea doesn't horrify me. She laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. I should be running. Should be calling the police. Should be doing anything except standing here wanting you to say yes. Damien caught her face between his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. If I do this, if I agree to his terms, it won't be because he threatened you. It'll be because I'm a selfish bastard who wants you enough to use any excuse to keep you. Then use it. Jennifer rose on her toes, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was softer than before, but no less devastating. When she pulled back, she whispered against his mouth. Use me. Keep me. Just don't let me go. Something broke in Damien's expression. He kissed her again, deep and claiming, a seal on a promise neither of them had the wisdom to refuse. Behind them, lightning split the sky. And inside the mansion, Susie Chandler woke from her afternoon nap. She wandered to the window, drawn by some instinct she couldn't name. Below, on the rain-soaked terrace, she watched 2 figures locked together in the storm. Something stirred in the dark places of her mind. A memory, fragmented and sharp. A man's face. A gunshot. The taste of betrayal. And a name. Eric Moniz. Susie's hand pressed against the cool glass, her reflection superimposing itself over the couple below. In that moment, past and present merged, and she remembered everything. 6 months can remake a person. 6 months can turn innocence into armor, compassion into calculation, and love into something far more dangerous than either. Jennifer Moniz stood alone on the balcony of her penthouse. Her penthouse now, not her father's, watching the sun bleed across the skyline. Dawn in the city had never looked so cold. The glass of untouched wine in her hand had gone warm, but she didn't notice. She was too busy remembering the girl she used to be. That girl had worn soft dresses and believed in saving people. That girl had knelt in blood on a dark street and cradled a dying woman's face. That girl had looked into Eric Moniz's eyes and felt the world tilt on its axis. That girl was gone. Jennifer set the glass down on the stone railing, her movements controlled, deliberate. The kind of precision she'd learned in boardrooms where one misstep meant losing everything. Her father had taught her how to be soft. Prison had taught her how to be stone. The engagement ring on her finger caught the early light, a flawless 3-carat diamond set in platinum. Beautiful. Expensive. Wrong. She twisted it absently, feeling its weight like a shackle. Marcus Chandler had proposed 4 weeks ago in front of the entire board of directors at Moniz Enterprises. Strategic. Calculated. A merger of power disguised as romance. He was everything that made sense: old money, political connections, a family legacy that matched hers. He smiled at her in public and called her darling at charity galas. He had never once made her feel like she was burning alive from the inside. Not like Eric had. Jennifer closed her eyes, but that only made it worse. Because when she closed her eyes, she saw him. Always him. In the shadows of every thought, in the silence of every moment, she tried to convince herself she'd moved on. Eric Moniz. The man who'd looked at her like she was salvation and damnation wrapped in the same skin. The man whose wife she'd saved. The man she'd kissed in the rain like the world was ending, knowing it was the worst thing she could do, and doing it anyway. We can't, she'd whispered against his mouth that night, even as her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer. I know, he'd breathed back, and then he'd kissed her like he was trying to memorize the taste of her before she disappeared. But she'd been the one to leave. She'd been the one to walk away, because staying meant destroying what was left of herself. And now here she was, CEO of her father's empire, engaged to a man who looked good on paper, living in a penthouse that felt like a mausoleum. Alone. Jennifer opened her eyes and stared out at the city sprawling beneath her. Somewhere out there, Eric was waking up too. Probably in that massive estate on the edge of the city, surrounded by security and silence. Did he think of her? Or had he finally let her go? The thought shouldn't hurt as much as it did. Across the city, Eric Moniz sat in his office in the dark. He hadn't turned the lights on. Didn't see the point. The only illumination came from the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, the kind of cold blue pre-dawn light that made everything look like a crime scene. Fitting. His desk was immaculate. Contracts stacked with military precision, a laptop closed and untouched, a crystal tumbler with 2 fingers of bourbon he hadn't drunk. Everything in its place. Everything controlled. Except the photograph in his hands. Susie Chandler smiled up at him from the frame, frozen in a moment 5 years gone. Young. Vibrant. The woman he'd loved with the kind of reckless intensity that only the young and stupid possess. The woman who'd almost died because of him. The woman who'd come back from the dead. The woman who'd left him anyway. Eric's jaw tightened as he stared at the photograph. Susie had recovered, slowly, painfully, but she'd recovered. Her memory had come back in fragments, jagged pieces of a life she didn't want anymore. She remembered the fear. The blood. The moment a bullet meant for him had found her instead. She remembered loving him. But she also remembered what that love had cost. 3 weeks ago, she'd walked into his office, this office, and handed him divorce papers. "I can't do this, Eric," she'd said, and her voice had been steady in a way that broke something in his chest. "I thought I could come back. I thought maybe we could be who we were. But we can't. I can't." He'd wanted to argue, to fight, to remind her of every promise they'd ever made. But then she'd looked at him with those haunted eyes and whispered, "You look at me like I'm a ghost. And maybe I am. Maybe I died that night, and what came back isn't the woman you married." She'd paused at the door, one hand on the frame, and said the words that had been echoing in his head ever since. "You love her. The girl who saved me. I see it, Eric. Every time you think I'm not looking. So stop pretending I'm what you want, and go get what you need." Then she was gone. Signed the papers. Took a settlement she didn't need, and disappeared into a life far away from the darkness that had swallowed them both. And Eric had let her go. Because she was right. He set the photograph down on his desk, face down, and finally allowed himself to think her name. Jennifer. God, just thinking it felt like touching a live wire. Jennifer Moniz. The girl with compassion in her eyes and blood on her hands. The girl who'd looked at him like he wasn't a monster, even when he'd trapped her in his world and told her she belonged to him now. The girl who'd kissed him in the rain and then vanished like smoke. He'd tried to find her. Of course he had. But Jennifer had built walls, learned to hide, transformed herself into something even more untouchable than he was. CEO of Moniz Enterprises now, after her father's empire collapsed and he'd been dragged to prison in handcuffs. Eric had watched the news footage of her walking out of the courthouse, head high, shoulders back, no tears. A queen born from the ashes of her father's sins. He'd wanted to go to her, to tell her he understood what it felt like to inherit darkness. But then he'd seen the ring. Marcus Chandler. Old money. Clean reputation. Safe. Everything Eric wasn't. He picked up the bourbon and drank it in one swallow, relishing the burn. It didn't help. Nothing helped. Because no matter how much distance he put between them, no matter how many months passed, he still felt her. In the silence. In the dark. In every moment he tried to convince himself she was better off without him. His phone buzzed on the desk. A message from his head of security. Target acquired. Marcus Chandler meeting with the Volkov family tonight. Location attached. Eric stared at the message, something cold and sharp settling in his chest. The Volkovs. Russian mafia. Enemies of his organization. And Marcus Chandler was meeting with them. Which meant Jennifer was in danger. Again, whether she wanted him or not. Jennifer was halfway through her second cup of coffee when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. But something instinct, stupidity, fate, made her pick up. Jennifer Moniz. Her voice was crisp. Professional. The voice of a woman who'd learned to hide everything that mattered. Silence on the other end. Then, a voice that sent lightning down her spine. You need to cancel your dinner plans tonight. Eric. Jennifer's hand tightened on the phone, her heart doing something violent and traitorous in her chest. 6 months. 6 months of silence, and now he called like no time had passed at all. Excuse me. She kept her voice cold, controlled, even though she wanted to scream at him or sob, or maybe both. Marcus Chandler is meeting with the Volkov family tonight, Eric said, his voice low and dangerous. And unless you want to end up in the same position Susie was in 5 years ago, you'll stay far away from him. The mention of Susie's name was like a blade between her ribs. I can take care of myself, Jennifer said. Can you? Eric's voice dropped even lower, something dark and possessive threading through it. Because from where I'm standing, you're engaged to a man who's making deals with people who'd slit your throat to get to me. Why would they come after me to get to you? Jennifer demanded. We're nothing to each other, Eric. You made that clear when you chose her. The words were out before she could stop them, and she hated how raw they sounded. Another beat of silence. Then, she left me. 2 words. That's all it took to shatter Jennifer's carefully constructed walls. What? Her voice came out strangled. Susie signed the divorce papers 3 weeks ago, Eric said, and there was no emotion in his voice, which somehow made it worse. She's gone. She doesn't want this life. Doesn't want me. And she's right not to. Jennifer pressed a hand to her chest, trying to breathe through the chaos those words unleashed. Why are you telling me this? She whispered. Because you need to know what you're walking into, Eric said. Marcus Chandler isn't who you think he is. He's using you, Jennifer. And when the Volkovs come for what he owes them, you'll be the collateral. I don't believe you. Then don't. His voice turned to steel. But when you're standing in that restaurant tonight and you see him shake hands with Dmitry Volkov, remember I warned you. Remember I tried to save you. I don't need you to save me, Jennifer said, even as her hands started to shake. I'm not that girl anymore. I know, Eric said, and something in his voice softened just enough to hurt. That's what scares me. The line went dead. Jennifer stood there, phone still pressed to her ear, staring at nothing. And for the first time in 6 months, she let herself admit the truth she'd been running from. She was still in love with Eric Moniz, and that was going to destroy them both. So what do you think happens next? Does Jennifer trust Eric's warning, or does she walk into the trap? Will she confront Marcus? And can 2 people who've been broken by the same darkness ever find their way back to each other? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me what you think Jennifer should do and where you're watching from. And if you're hooked on this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens when these 2 finally stop running from each other. Because trust me, it's about to get dangerous.